Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's being hailed as a victory for disabled people. Doug Pawley, who uses a wheelchair, took legal action because he couldn't board a bus in Leeds when a mother with a pushchair refused to make way for him. Today, judges at the Supreme Court ruled that the bus company's policy of requesting but not requiring other passengers to move was not good enough. Our Disability Affairs correspondent, Nikki Fox, reports.
It's taken nearly 5 years of legal battles to get to this point.
How are you feeling, Doug? How are you feeling?
But finally, Doug Pawley has had his day in the highest court in the country. All 7 judges agreed that the bus company's policy of requesting, not requiring a person to vacate the wheelchair space was unlawful. But it's not quite as clear-cut, as the judgment doesn't go as far as insisting someone move from the space.
I'm really pleased with the result. I mean, I'm aware that some people won't be pleased. It's not gone as far as some people would like, or it has gone too far as other people would like. But, you know, in the end, this is about disabled people's right to access, to travel on the bus, and hopefully today has been at least a step in the right direction.
This all began back in 2012 when Doug was unable to catch a bus because the space for wheelchairs was occupied by a mum and her pushchair. She refused to move, which meant Doug couldn't get on. The bus operator First Group admit that following today's verdict, they may have to amend the training they provide staff, but they are pleased their drivers won't have to force people off the bus.
We really welcome the fact that the court has confirmed that a driver is not required to remove a passenger from a bus if they are refusing to move from this space. That's really important for drivers to have that clarity.
The impact of today's judgment will have much wider implications that span further than just buses. Any service provider or company that has a dedicated space for disabled people, now that could be a supermarket disabled bay or an accessible toilet in a restaurant, they will have to make sure that wheelchair users get priority. But not all wheelchair users agree.
I won't go in the bus and take women with the prams. You know, I am disabled, right, but I am still a man, and you know, this just feels not right.
But what about mums with babies? It's not quite as simple as wheelchairs versus pushchairs.
It's better off if it just remains a grey area for people to use the common sense.
However nuanced, today's Supreme Court ruling does pave the way for a closer look at legislation when it comes to prioritising access for wheelchair users. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
A disabled passenger is tonight hailing what he claims is an important victory in his legal battle over wheelchair access on buses. The Supreme Court stopped short of requiring bus companies to enforce priority for wheelchair users in designated spaces, but campaigner Doug Pawley said today's partial victory was still a significant cultural change. Rebecca Barry was in court.
So is it fair empty baggies stay there on a wheelchair priority and you
She's a priority as well. She's got 2 kids.
A typical morning for a disabled person trying to get on a bus. She can't because the wheelchair space is taken up by a buggy.
You're rude. You're
Come on the
very
bus.
rude.
Just come on the bus.
Yeah?
You're holding up the bus.
You're
For everybody. Can you just come on the bus?
Eventually, the buggy's folded away and the tearful woman can get on with her journey.
I think
All this happened just over the road from the Supreme Court, just after it had made a landmark ruling on the rights of wheelchair users. When something similar happened to Doug Pawley, he took the bus company to court.
Cheers.
And after a 5-year legal battle this morning, the highest court in the land ruled that bus companies must do more to help wheelchair users.
This is a major day for rights of disabled people. Catching the bus is a fundamental thing that most people expect to be able to do.
The ruling means it's not enough for the driver to simply request that someone make space for a wheelchair user. Instead, they must consider taking further steps to pressurise someone to move.
How would you feel if the bus driver said, no, you have to take your baby out, fold the buggy up and make space for the wheelchair?
It's my baby, I don't want to wake him up and make him upset and make him cry.
Disabled person has got priority.
Even if your baby was fast asleep?
I think so.
What do we want? Access!
But it's still not a legal requirement for a passenger to move for a wheelchair user.
The driver has to require somebody to move away. That is really tough, particularly because the driver has no legal redress behind him. So he can do nothing if that passenger still refuses to move.
Get on the bus then.
Campaigners say it's a victory for the UK's 1.2 million wheelchair users and say they'll be pressing the government to update the law in light of today's ruling. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Absolutely delighted. That's how Doug Paulley feels after winning a partial victory against a bus company at the Supreme Court in a battle over wheelchair spaces. Mr. Paulley, who uses a wheelchair, was left at a bus stop after a woman with a child in a buggy refused to move. First Group said drivers already did all that could be reasonably expected, but they'll now have to put pressure on people to clear the priority wheelchair space if someone who needs it gets on. But the ruling isn't totally clear, as Jane Death reports.
They're calling it the Paulley principle. Those in wheelchairs will normally take priority over those with pushchairs. 4 years ago, Doug Paulley couldn't get on the bus to Leeds because a woman with a buggy refused to move, because the baby was asleep and the buggy wouldn't fold. Mr. Paulley took First Group to court. Today, the Supreme Court ruled its policy of drivers simply asking someone to move wasn't good enough.
The request should be rephrased as a requirement, particularly where the non-wheelchair user could move elsewhere in the bus.
A partial victory then. The judges said drivers should pressurise or shame someone into moving up the bus, but they didn't give them the legal right or responsibility to chuck anyone off the bus.
Did it go far enough, them saying that it depends on the circumstances and they can't order a person off the bus?
I think they always have to strike a balance. You know, there's always going to be exceptional circumstances where somebody else might need that space, but barring something really exceptional, that the driver must encourage people to move.
And that is now a legal precedent.
The situation that I had, where a man just refused to pull his buggy back to let me into the wheelchair space, and he could have gone back in front of me, that would have been deemed to be unreasonable.
But the bus company says it can't do much if people refuse to cooperate.
But we're actually on the side of our drivers, who have a hugely responsible job.
Not the passengers?
We are, in this case, we're always on the side of our passengers, but in this case we need to be on the side of our drivers, who are sometimes put in very difficult situations.
In that case, what does today's ruling really mean?
It means that the next time someone refuses to move from the wheelchair space, the driver must be much more forceful, maybe even refusing to drive any further if necessary. But the judges also said that the approach depends on the circumstances. So it's not guaranteed that a wheelchair user will always be able to get on the bus.
So would parents with pushchairs make room?
No disabled person has got priority, I guess.
I would probably take my baby and give the space, but yeah, I think it's very tough.
Some are saying today's ruling went too far, others that it didn't go far enough. But to work, it's going to depend on considerate passengers or drivers' powers of persuasion.